Welcome to another edition of Inspired Stories, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes, how they've overcome adversity, and explore current challenges they're facing.
Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Sharon Lowery, owner and director of Smart Start Developmental Learning Center, which was founded in 1992 in a converted garage in Culver City, California. They are a special kind of preschool and elementary school. They offer speech services, occupational therapy, developmental behavior therapy, and so much more. They believe that all children have the right to develop and to be fully known hearts and minds. They have a passion for the most current and progressive foundational education and services. Smart Start is unique in their approach, and they are committed to a comprehensive developmental education and therapy model for all of their children. Sharon herself has a long list of degrees, certifications, and specialties, including a bachelor's and master's in psychology. She has a postgraduate certification in expert trainer in DIR Floortime. She has studied under Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and she is an expert in the fields of special education, inclusive special education, relationship-based and sensory-based education. And she was a senior level ABA therapist and was trained by Dr. Ivar Lovas, who is the founder of this style of therapy. But she now has different ideas on ABA, and we'll hear more about that. Before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our proprietary programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now, back to our guest today, the owner and director of Smart Start Developmental Learning Center, Sharon Lowery. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Thank you. I'm going to enjoy being here and talking with you.
So tell me who Dr. Stanley Greenspan is and why he was so instrumental in your approach to early childhood education.
Sure. It's Stanley Greenspan, so that might clarify things a little bit. So
what did I say?
Stanley.
Thanks for the correction.
It's okay. It would be a unique name. So Stanley Greenspan is no longer with us, but Stanley Greenspan was a psychiatrist, and he was in the Washington, D.C. area, and specifically in Bethesda, Maryland. And he was seeing children who had neurobiological challenges. And so he began to look at how do we tease apart healthy development and how are the neurobiological challenges that he was seeing in his clients, how were those impacting their developmental milestones and how they were achieving them. And so he came to his methodology, something called the DIR Floortime model, by studying healthy development and then integrating the understanding of how the neurobiological challenges were impacting their development, having a deep understanding of the sensory system of children and how the disintegration of their sensory system was impacting their development, and then creating a methodology that goes back in and hits all the developmental stages from zero all the way up through their current stage of development, and looking to see where their gaps were and going back in and filling those. The difference is with his methodology is it was done and is done through play-based interaction. And foundationally, it's he had a catchphrase that has become very misunderstood, but it was follow the lead of the child. And what he meant by that was you are looking at the individual interests that child has, and that is going to be your window in to your therapeutic intervention. And sometimes children who have developmental challenges may have very, very curious interests. So maybe they have a strong love of cars and trucks, and you think, oh, boys and girls, or particularly boys, usually have strong interests in cars and trucks. But really what they're doing is they're feeding their visual system through watching the wheels of those trucks go. Okay, yeah, so that gives us a little bit of information about that child. But then I'm going to take cars and trucks, and that's going to be my window into building that relationship with the child. Because as human beings, we all know that we have strong relationships with people that share the same things we love. And so the D in DIR is development. So studying development, I is the individual difference. So looking at all the individual differences in the children, and R is foundation, which is the relationship. And that was very different than the interventions that we were seeing for kids who had what we would say now neurodiversity.
So tell me what you mean by disintegration of sensory systems.
Okay. So people are born with a sensory system. And when children are having some struggles with the way that system is starting to integrate, they have from 0 to 3 months of age, we are as infants learning how to regulate to our environment. So we can take in all the different stimulation, and with support or with soothing, we can come to a calm, regulated state. That calm, regulated state allows us to then be able to interpret the world and to make our developmental gains. If you have disintegration, you're not able to access the ability to soothe because your central nervous system came out raw and the neural pathways are not strong and are not firing efficiently to send the information, that back and forth signaling system, that with pressure or with a hug from mommy or daddy or whoever the caregiver is, then that baby can come into a soothed state. There are different sensory systems that the sensory systems that we all know, of course, sight, sound, taste, touch, but there is also the proprioceptive system and the vestibular system. The vestibular system tells us where our body is in space through the information through our middle ear. The proprioceptive system is the system of our body that tells us where we are in space through the information to our joints and muscles. So very often children who have neurobiological challenges have an under-responsive proprioceptive system. So the information that they're getting is not hitting their neural pathways. And so all the ways that we know to soothe and connect, they're not able to soothe and connect that child. So when you have that dysregulation, you need to go in and see what systems are under-responsive, what's over-responsive, and how can we address that. And this is absolutely under the domain of an occupational therapist. Jean Ayres was the creator of sensory integration therapy, and that is a pivotal therapy for children to make the progress that they need to make in order to be able to access all the learning environments.
So when you talk about underdeveloped pathways, is this like a physical underdevelopment? Say more about that.
Okay, so we're going to step way out of my depth of knowledge, okay. But I'm gonna share with you from a very more of a helicopter view. So the neural pathways and the signaling system, the hardwiring of those neural pathways that signals the brain to the parts of the body and back and forth, those neural pathways are not solid or strong. And so what you get is that dysregulation, because what would be a solid foundational neural pathway, the child would be responsive in a way that would be predictable within the quote unquote normal bell curve of development. So that when you are doing the type of therapy where you're integrating and working through the sensory system, you are strengthening those neural pathways. And so let's say, for example, that child who loves to roll cars back and forth in front of their eyes because they're feeding a visual system and they lay down on the ground because they need more input into their body. If you're taking and you're doing activities that are strengthening their ability to integrate the information, you are doing activities where they get to see things flying. Let's say you're doing bubbles or water balloons or things that are, you're doing an activity where you have balloons that are on a string and they're doing some hand-eye coordination. All those things are strengthening those neural pathways, so then they don't have to be down on the ground rolling cards back in front of their eyes because they don't have a sensory need for that anymore.
So let me workshop something with you. So say you've got a child with a particular phobia. And so that, I'm assuming, indicates that these pathways are not well developed. And tell me if I'm wrong on this. And then by following some of the things in this line of thought, you can strengthen those pathways and maybe that phobia becomes less reduced.
Okay, so let me ask you, when you say phobia, because that isn't a word we use in child development, tell me what you mean by that, because I want to be able to kind of bring the two together.
Like a child who might be deathly afraid of bugs.
Okay, so if it's a child who's afraid of bugs and they're just a little one, so they don't know, the spider might bite me and then I get itchy and that was a really horrible experience for me. And so there's trauma associated. We're not talking about trauma association to phobias. I would say that that child cannot predict the movement of that bug. And so it gives them, a flight response or a fight response. So they can't integrate the information because the predictability of that bug creates anxiety in them. So if you are then working through multiple activities that are helping them be able to tolerate movement or less predictable movement, but in a safe environment where they are with trusted adults who they love, then they are going to be able to then begin to tolerate things that are less predictable or movement that's less predictable. They may always be a child that doesn't love bugs, or let's say they don't love birds, because birds for sure when they fly around are never going to be predictable, and that can be a bit of a trigger for them. But then they can come up with adaptive strategies to help them understand, oh, that's a bird. Yeah, that made me feel uncomfortable, but I'm going to be okay.
So to help develop these neural pathways and to help them feel safe and protected, loved, the primary avenue is sort of safe human touch. Is that a summary?
Yeah, I think mostly it is being in an environment, the school environment in particular, or the home therapeutic environment is set up so the person who they're with, whether it's a parent, whether it's a caregiver, whether it's a therapist, whether it's the teacher at the schools, it's going to be the educators. They are known by their educator. So the educator knows the things that are hard for them. They know the things that they love. One of the things that's in our enrollment packet is it's a page that says I love, and the family fills in all the things that child loves: books, characters, songs, toys, activities, movies. And we make sure we have those things available on that child's first day, because not only is that very comforting for them, but it begins to build that relationship. And it says to that child, oh, they like the same things I like. So when you are building that trusted relationship, and this if you're a parent or if you are a grandparent or, you have nieces and nephews, when you have that bond with the children, they are willing to do a lot more things than they would with somebody that they don't know is a safe person that's going to hold them and be able to take them through the things that are hard.
You said something else that I'm curious to know more about. Follow the lead of the child. And this idea has kind of been misunderstood. In what way?
Yeah. So this goes to the DIR Floortime model is a very complex model of intervention for, it works for the lifespan of any individual. It works with neurotypical, neurodiverse. It works with an aging population. It's used in a geriatric setting as well. But when Dr. Greenspan created, I had the privilege of working directly with him, and he loved people and he loved kids. And I know that may sound like, well, of course, but as we all know, that's not always true when people are leaders in their field. But he loved children. And so what he would say, when he said follow the lead, what people heard is that when you're doing the DIR Floortime therapy is you follow the child around, and you don't set up intentional specific activities for the child that you know ahead of time is going to address the developmental needs of that child. And so a lot of people who have not had the proper DIR Floortime training end up doing their quote unquote therapy by following the child around. Children who have who have neurodiversity and have these challenges have oftentimes challenges in organization of behavior. So their ability to be more intentional about their choices is something that they're definitely going to be working on. And so if you're just following a child around, you are not creating a therapeutic intervention. You are exacerbating a child that needs the support to begin to develop organization of behavior. So a different way of looking at what he was saying is look at the lead of interest of that child. Identify what that child's interests are. That's going to lead you to your tickets and your windows into your intervention with that child and how to form that relationship and that bond with that child. It's also going to inform the sensory challenges because you're watching, like my example with a child who lays down to roll cars in front of their eyes. You're going to get 2 tickets on that one. You're going to get the ticket that they love cars and trucks, but you're also going to get the ticket that they need a lot of visual sensory input and they lay down on the ground because they don't feel entirely safe and they get a lot of input into their body when they're laying flat on the ground in a setting that may be overwhelming for them.
Interesting. So you find that the child is really into cars and trucks. You start playing cars and trucks with them as a way to sort of initiate the conversation about the thing that they need assistance with.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say initiate a conversation because a lot of times these are not kids who are conversational yet. So it's your window into the therapeutic intervention that you're going to establish and your goals that you're going to set for them. And you wouldn't just be playing cars and trucks. Let's say, for example, that child has a strong sensitivity to textures and maybe what you're going to do then. And so textures are aversive for them. And so it means that they really shy away from anything that's wet or sticky or anything like that. Or they just, sand is not something that they can tolerate.
Sharon,
what you're going to do is, sorry.
Please continue.
So what you're going to do is you're going to choose activities that involve cars. So if they don't like wet or sticky substances, you might take shaving cream and put it out on a table and draw roads. And then the child is driving through the shaving cream with their truck. They are getting that texture that normally would be really noxious for them, but they're able, because they have that love for the trucks, they're able to begin to tolerate that texture, which then builds and strengthens those neural pathways.
Interesting. So let's shift into talking about ABA therapy. Can you first explain what it is and then why you no longer align with it?
Sure. So ABA therapy, ABA stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. And back when I was trained at UCLA, the creator of the methodology and its application to, at that time, individuals who had an autism diagnosis is Ivar Lovaas. And Ivar Lovaas, he came out of the University of Washington and he came to UCLA, and he was coming in at a time in the 70s when autism was Kanner identified the syndrome or the diagnosis in the 40s. So really, truly, it had only been an identified diagnosis for 30 years at that point. So he came in and he took the work of B.F. Skinner, and there were other colleagues at the University of Washington that were doing some of the same work. But he took the work of B.F. Skinner, which is operant conditioning, the stimulus response, the traditional, the pigeon pecked a place on the cage, they got a pellet, it reinforced the behavior. So the foundation of ABA is there's an antecedent, there's a behavior, and there's a consequence. And if it's a positive consequence, the behavior increases. If it's a negative consequence, the behavior is supposed to decrease. So when Dr. Lowery came in, there had not been any early intervention. That was not part of the mandates to the states yet. And so these were individuals who were very impacted it wasn't even called autism spectrum at that point. With autism, wow. A lot of them were in state hospitals. There was a lot of self-injurious behavior. So he came up with this methodology of using the operant conditioning of we want to increase adaptive behaviors and decrease maladaptive behaviors. And you do that through giving them either positive, a positive verbal response or a treat. There was, countless M&Ms and goldfish were applied at that time, goldfish crackers. Or they got a very firm no. All ABA has turned away from this now, but there were thigh slaps, hand slaps. There was famously, people used cattle prods. It has a very, very dark past. Nobody does that anymore. That's not part of the methodology. But Dr. Lowery, I read back from Psychology Today in the 80s that he once quoted, and this one really just is a kick in the stomach. He believed at the time that children with autism don't have a soul.
Oh my goodness.
We're just going to sit with that for a moment. Now, I knew him. I worked with him. He was a mentor. And I really don't know if that's truly, and I don't know if he truly believed that, but he saw children as the sum total of their behaviors. And when he was designing his methodology, if anybody knows, university professors keep their jobs by doing research, right? That's how they maintain their positions, especially at the high level universities. So when he was creating, it was called behavior modification at that point. It wasn't called ABA. But when he was creating his model, he couldn't figure out how to take data on the emotional system. So he just left that out of the intervention model of serving kids. So it is purely a methodology, and it has a very specific curriculum for all children, regardless of how they come to their autism spectrum diagnosis or their developmental delay diagnosis. There's a specific methodology that is based not on how children develop. It has no integration of understanding their neurodiversity and their sensory system, and it takes in no account to the development of their emotional system. So if you believe, Dr. Greenspan, switching over to him for a moment, believed that your EQ drives your IQ, your emotional intelligence drives your intellectual intelligence. So you're starting with a methodology that is based on foundationally on that children are a product of their behaviors. It doesn't take into account that they came wired in some pretty interesting ways. And it also doesn't integrate any part of their emotional development, if I already said that. So it is something that is easy to learn, it's easy to train, it's easy to teach. So it's the predominant way of intervention. It is a well-researched methodology because it's come out of a lot of universities. So there is that idea that it is science-based and it's a research-based methodology. But it does not integrate the whole child, and it's not based on foundational development and how children are human beings first, and we are emotional beings, and we all, from our own experiences, really know that when you have somebody who loves you and is there for you and works with you, or you have a professor or a teacher in school that's really passionate about their subject, or you're personally passionate about your subject, you integrate and you learn very differently than when you have to do something that truly has no meaning for you. You're going to do what you have to do, and then you're going to move on and you're going to forget it all.
And so at what point did you realize that this was not the methodology that you believed in?
Two things. One, I started to have exposure because my sole foundation was, I was a hardwired, dyed-in-the-wool ABA therapist, because that was my foundation at UCLA. And so they had a program at UCLA where you actually got to go and work in-home with children with autism. And I absolutely loved the work. And so I really believed in it. The difference was when Smart Start first started, after a couple of years, we had a teacher come to us who was from Australia, and she was a developmentalist. And she really taught me a lot about development. And I started to think, there's so much I really don't know. But the real change was when my daughter was born. So I started this school when my daughter was 18 months old. And we started as an ABA therapist. But when I started to then think about the things that I did with children, and I started to watch the way that I interacted with my daughter, they were very different. And I could not do that. I couldn't work that way with kids anymore.
How were you working with your daughter that was different?
Oh my goodness, she was a kid first, and we had a loving bond and a relationship. And ABA is my daughter was born in 1990 and the school started in 92. So this was, ABA was very intense at that time. It was, there's a component of it that some companies still use. It's called discrete trial training. And it's mass repetitions of presentations of materials to learn. So it's like if you put a red block, a green block, and a yellow block in front of a child, and you say, touch red, and they touch the blue. No, do it again. Press, touch red. No. It's really it's very intense. Good job.
It sounds cold and transactional.
It is 100. That's a perfect description of it. And so then I have this adorable, beautiful little baby crawling around, and she and I are learning about the colors of things because we're playing with them and we're talking about them. And it was an organic, of course, very beautiful way to teach, but it was so different than what I was doing with kids.
Was that destabilizing to you in some way? Because like you said, you were a dyed-in-the-wool ABA, this was your foundation. And now it's like, hang on, everything that I sort of based my work, my career on seems to be built on a very unstable foundation.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't a super rapid transformation, because we didn't transform the school to a developmental school until 1998. So we're talking, it was a transformation. It was a transformation of integrating and bringing more people in who really looked at kids differently and thought differently. But, my background is my mom was a special education teacher. And of course, I swore I was never going to do that. Right. Of course. So, but I have I was raised and I have a deep respect for special educators. I saw how hard my mom worked, how passionately she worked with kids. And this was way before ABA was ever integrated. And I saw how dismissive ABA was of the special education field, like, step aside, people, we know what we're doing.
Oh, is that right?
Oh my goodness, to this day. Anyway, and it's unfortunately integrated special education. So it's the predominant methodology in schools now too, working with kids, which, yeah, you can imagine how I feel about that. But also my father was a writer, and he wrote a book. Oh my goodness, I can't even tell you, maybe in the 80s, 70s. It was called The Kid Business, and it was about, he was a nonfiction writer, and he was a reporter for the LA Times, but he wrote a lot of nonfiction books, but he wrote a nonfiction book, and this one was called The Kid Business, and it was about the industry of children. So I sort of come at this with this background of a strong heart for kids. And so for me, it was, I've always wanted to do best by children. And I don't have, I'm very passionate, I'm outspoken, but I never want to think that I know or have all the answers. I want to always grow and develop the programs that I have the privilege of directing and guiding to integrate whatever is going to work best for children and families. And so I wasn't going to hold on. My ego was not going to determine the future of the school.
Good for you. I mean, that's a difficult thing to kind of admit to yourself as well as to those around you, that I had a very strong belief system over here. And I get that it didn't happen overnight, which makes sense. Like, yeah, these things, there's an evolution to the process, right? You had to be exposed to different ways of thinking and be able to sort of test them out in your own life with your own kid, and then, in your own school to kind of, come to the realization that there's a better and a different way. But I mean, you got to pat yourself on the back for making that transition, because for a lot of folks, the ego would be too strong to be able to let go of this former identity.
Yeah. And, to this day, I would say that I am still a recovering ABA therapist, because...
Are you in a 12-step program? You go to meetings?
Well, I am, I do regularly attend them. No, it's like anything. What your initial training is can get a little too hardwired, but what I've really been able to do is present new employees who come from an ABA background of a path out of it. And then also, much more importantly, I've been able to give parents who are trying to decide what is the best intervention for their child. I've been able to say, I've walked that road, and let me share with you why that's not the road I travel anymore, and why we're a different type of a program. And so for me, I'm extremely grateful for that background, because it gives me the perspective of knowing and then being able to share why I chose differently.
And why is it specifically that ABA is so dismissive of special ed? They think they're too touchy-feely, or what's...
This is 100% an editorial comment, and so I'm just going to go there with you.
Please do.
Dr. Lovas was a force. He was, I think he was Norwegian. He was from Scandinavia. Let's say, but he was a very strong personality, and he believed that what he was doing was all powerful and all important. And he was a force within the psychology department at UCLA. And he had a group of graduate students that were the first wave of PhD students that came out. And they all started ABA agencies, or behavior modification agencies. And these are all, and I worked for one of them after I graduated. These are all men who believed, and ultimately, there was one woman who really, really took off. Her name is she's very much alive, Doreen Grams-Pichet, and she started an organization that became the largest ABA organization internationally, and CARD, which is the Center for Autism and Related Disorders, maybe. I don't know what CARD stands for. Can you ask me your question again?
What? No problem. You get passionate. You got to go off on these tangents, and it brings up
I
other
know, and then I'm
feelings.
like, please, I got to bring it back, and I can't remember the question.
So why is ABA so dismissive of special ed? What's
Okay, sorry.
the beef there?
So these men and women believed that what they were doing, they knew best. Like and I will not name his name, one of the people I worked for when a child was going to go to occupational therapy to get sensory integration, he's like, well, that's this junk science, but it can't hurt for half an hour a day that they get that. Well, that's a foundational therapy for these kids. So when you went into a special education classroom, the belief is we know so much more than you do, and we know better than you do, and kind of a pat on the head. Let us show you a better way to work with kids. And so when I would go in and work in schools with kids and with teachers, because I was the daughter of a special educator, oh my goodness, that was never going to be the way I was going to interact with the teachers. But I would watch some of my coworkers and the way that we were coached and supervised. It was to go in and show the better way. And unfortunately, then it became ABA became so prevalent, it became part of the curriculum in the special education credential programs. And because it is quote unquote efficacy based and has this research behind it, it's believed to be the most effective methodology. But in reality, developmental science has been around a lot longer than ABA, and there's a lot more research to that. But there's great lobbies, and it's been people have made a lot of money doing ABA.
So I didn't initially intend to spend so much time on these different methodologies, but I found it fascinating. And so I'm glad that we did. And I'm sure that our listeners will appreciate that as well. But now I want to focus on Smart Start. And first of all, what was the inspiration for starting it? You had a daughter who was 18 months old at the time. Was she part of the reasoning behind starting the school? Tell us how it came into formation.
Yeah. So before I had my first child, I was an ABA therapist, and I traveled all over Los Angeles providing in-home behavior therapy. And I went down as far as Orange County, all the way up to the San Fernando Valley. And if anybody is a Southern California person listening, they know that's a long way. I put 60,000 miles on my car in 1 year. And then I had my daughter, and I did not want to be away from her for that length of time. And I had a coworker at the time who had her son a few months after I had my daughter, and they were both about, I don't know, not yet a year. And she said, "What do you think about starting a preschool for kids with autism?" And she had a detached garage. She lived in Culver City, and she said, "We can convert my garage." And I thought, okay, I love that idea. I'd never imagined that I was going to be an entrepreneur. It was never part of any thoughts that I had. I never actually intended to go on into this field. I was going to be a psychologist, and I was in a master's program for counseling. I was going to get my PhD. I had all different plans, but clearly that was not my path. So it came at the same time that early intervention was beginning to get funded through IDEA in California. So it was the beginning of the Early Start programs in California. And so because I am a daughter of two people who championed the causes of people who were less fortunate, I went to find out how we could access public funding for our program. And so we started the program by getting vendored to be a program in Southern California, serving kids between 18 months and 3 years old through the regional center system in California, which is a program for all people, regardless of their ability to pay, where the state of California pays for services for children with identified needs. So we marketed way before marketing was a word. And we started with one student and then quickly built up our program to serve children through that age group. And we were in the garage for 3 years.
So what did marketing look like in the early days?
Going to people's home and sharing with them what our plan was and what we were going to do, and sitting in living rooms and talking about our background and how we could make a difference in their child's life. That was how we got our first child. And
you're just walking up and down the street, knocking on random people's doors?
No. It was like, because, somebody might say, hey, I know this family is looking for a program, and because we were already connected within the community of behavior therapy. And then once the program got started, the regional center, the West Side Regional Center, which is the part of Southern California that we're in, the schools in Santa Monica, had a group of caseworkers who really supported our program and began to send lots of kids to us that came into their system, and they came out to visit the program. So we built a reputation pretty quickly. And because of my background and my partner at that time, her background, we were already established and known within the community as therapists.
And so at what point did things progress to the point where you needed to move out of the garage?
We were bursting at the seams, and my business partner's family was really ready for people not to be in their garage anymore. So we moved to a second location in Santa Monica. We chose Santa Monica because it's a city that has, within their city codes, you don't have to get a conditional use permit to lease a building. And they had a lot of support for childcare within the city, because it's an extremely liberal city. So we found a small, it had been a pediatric office, but it was a converted 2-story house. And so we were there for 5 years. And then after we outgrew that site, we moved to our current location, which is also in Santa Monica, but it's a 6,000 square foot building with lots and lots of outdoor space for our kids.
And so what do the services look like today?
So we have a number of ages and stages and groups of kids that we're working with. So we are what's called a full inclusion school. Full inclusion means that all kids are welcome regardless of their learning challenges. So we serve kids from all the way from highly gifted to the kids who are very significantly impacted either with autism or genetic syndromes. There is a phrase that's not used anymore very much, but it's called reverse mainstreaming, because we have been foundationally a therapeutic program our whole existence. But when we moved to our current location in 2000, we opened it to all children so we could be full inclusion, so that all kids can come, and the benefits to the kids who have special needs to have neurotypical peers is obvious, and we can talk about that if there's time. But for the kids who don't have special needs, there are some very significant advantages for those kids to be in the environment, and we serve kids all the way up through highly gifted. We also, our kids can start as young, I say as long as they're stable walkers, they can start in the program. So that's usually, 12 to 18 months. And that we have a program for kids up and that classroom is for through age 3. We have a 3-year-old preschool classroom. We have a 4-year-old preschool classroom that's now a transitional kindergarten. We have 2 different kindergarten options, and then we have an elementary program that goes through 5th grade. We also provide speech and language therapy for the kids who have the speech and language needs. And then we also have occupational therapy. And then the last component of the program is we provide in-home DIR Floortime therapy. And that is provided afternoons, evenings, and weekends for children. Those are all children with identified needs.
So where does the funding come from? Is this all private pay? Is there any insurance or public funds that comes into play?
All of the above. So predominantly this is funded for our kids under 3 who have special needs. They are funded through the regional center system in California for the school program for speech and occupational therapy. The DIR behavior therapy is funded through the regional center system as well. If once the kids turn 3 in California, the school districts are responsible for funding their education. If they are placed with us, there are 3 different ways to come. One is for families to pay privately. The second is for them to be reimbursed through the school district, which is a legal process the families have to go to. But we're also what's called a non-public school, which is through the California Department of Education. You can become certified to be in non-public school, and school districts can place children in our program. So those are the 3 different ways, but it's much more common for children to come with funding from some source rather than families paying privately.
And you mentioned that there are benefits for neurodivergent kids to have neurotypical kids in the same classroom. Is that just because, oh, look, Johnny's my size, he's, doing that thing, that means I should be able to do that thing? Is that sort of what it is, like inspired by your peers?
Yeah, I mean, there's some, that's one component of it. There's a few different ways that it supports the child who has learning differences. One is that if the child does not have any identified special needs, then they can support and kind of hang with that child for a little longer. If the teacher says, hey, can you play such and such with your friend? And remember, they communicate by using their hands, or remember, they're not going to be able to share with you using their words, but they definitely want to play with you. And so that's one advantage. Another is the component of a little bit of like what you were saying, but kids who are the same size provide a visual motor map. So if they are doing the same thing, then you would have the child, like if you're doing, like, let's say an obstacle course, you're going to have the child who does not have the same challenges go first. So the peers who have the challenges can watch and do a visual mapping of how that child navigated that obstacle course. So you're getting a motor map, a model of the motor map. And for our kids who do not have special needs, it is a much more individualized program. So you've got educators with their eyes on all kids, because we all come with areas that are easier for us and areas of learning that are more challenged. And so you get a much more focused educator watching and supporting your child. Of course, the huge component from the social emotional component is that they learn that all peers come differently created, so that they're, a lot of the kids have been with us since they're 2 years old, and they've been in an inclusive setting, and they actually don't really have any conscious processes about, oh, I'm a good friend to so-and-so because they have special needs. It's just part of their existence. And that is a really beautiful thing, because if you didn't have that experience and you see somebody who really has a different presentation, you don't really know how to integrate or how to approach that person. So it builds that really, they really know how to be kind.
It's almost like you're hardwiring them to be more accepting and open to people who present differently.
Yeah, it doesn't really even they don't have a thought about it. It's like,
Yeah.
well, this friend doesn't communicate with their mouth. They have a device and they can type and they can communicate. For our older kids, they use iPads sometimes to communicate. So that friend, they communicate this way, even though I know that's true. He's also a phenomenal reader and he reads better than I do. Or, it's like if the younger kids are they're learning to read, and sometimes children on the autism spectrum have hyperlexia, which means they can become early readers. So when the teacher calls somebody up to read who's not yet reading, she might say, hey, let's ask so-and-so up and you guys can read together because he's reading already and he can help you with that. So really helping show each of the kids what their strengths are and what are the areas of extra support they may need. For the kids who are in the gifted profile, very often they can come into us with maybe some speech delay. It's not uncommon for them to have delays in development. But then as they get closer to 3, it's obvious that actually those things are coming in and they're probably more in the gifted profile. But what happens a lot of times for kids who are in the gifted range is their emotional systems are not quite as strong as their intellectual systems. And so you get some struggles with taking the perspective of others. And so there's some EQ work that really needs to be done with the gifted kids, because they're going to have their own challenges, because they're going to be really far ahead in the academic realm, and teaching them how to really be a kind friend and an accommodating friend and developing their social skills as well. It's really important for that group.
What does the term garden variety mean?
Yes. So that is a euphemism for an inclusive setting where all kids are welcome and they can come to us from all different backgrounds. They may have high levels of need within, from a developmental perspective. We've had kids with genetic issues, with genetic conditions, terminal illness, kids who, again, go on to have a gifted profile, and kids who are just, going to travel a smoother educational journey. So it kind of just means everybody's welcome.
Sharon, before your daughter was born, you did a lot of in-home services, and you started the school. Are in-home services still part of what you do?
Yeah. We still do the in-home behavior therapy, but it's done with the DIR Floortime model. So we have a whole group of families that we serve. Some of them go to the school, and we serve them in-home. Some of them come to us because there aren't a lot of agencies that do the DIR Floortime model. And then some of them used to go to the school, but now are up in the middle school range or high school range, because that service goes up to age 18.
Where does Smart Start go from here? Are there plans for growth, new services, new buildings, more classrooms, or you feel like, hey, we've got a good thing going, we're not going to monkey with it?
I'm 61. I don't really have a desire to grow outside of the building that we're in, but we are in a recovery still from COVID. So we have begun to increase our class sizes again. During COVID, not only, of course, we had to close. We closed for a short period of time because we're a private school. As soon as California allowed us to do what we wanted to do, we did it. But we had to reduce our class sizes, and there was a season where parents were still very anxious about sending kids back to school. So our class sizes reduced, either because parents weren't ready to send their kids back, or we kept a smaller class size because we needed to keep spacing. So we're in a very focused rebuilding period, and wanting to grow the program so that we're increasing our preschool program to add more kids. We do have availability in that. And the elementary program, we're continuing to, right now I'm already starting to tour for next school year. So it is in a growth cycle in that way. Our home services, that's not something that has the limitations of space, because we can add we can add more kids because we're serving them in home. It doesn't it's not limited by our square footage.
And how about staff? Is it difficult to find and retain good staff?
Well, I believe that's not just in our industry, but absolutely the job market and the ability to the staff that we have is a really spectacular group of people who are committed. The hiring process has definitely, the face of that has changed pretty dramatically. It is harder to add new staff. Some of the limitations of growth have been based on making sure that we are getting people that are of the caliber and the background that we need to be able to do the type of work we do. So it has most definitely been a challenge, and I've had to do a lot of learning and growing on how to pivot for this new season within the job candidates and the job market.
What things have you tried and had success with so far? In terms of, how do I find somebody good? How do I hold on to somebody good?
It's been a challenge for me, because I can't and won't compromise on the caliber of people that we're bringing in. So it is, for me, when I'm looking for new staff, of course, they have to have a background in working with children. But what I'm always looking for is somebody who's very passionate about what they do and really loves to play with kids. And that may sound strange. Well, of course, they're in education. They love to play with kids. But the ability to play with kids is not a lot of people have it. So I haven't compromised in that area, but it does make it a challenge. So I no longer get offended, though I scratch my head when, you have 10 interviews set up and 3 people show up for those interviews, even though they've all confirmed that they're coming. But I have a friend who's a senior partner in a law firm, and he's like, well, we haven't been able to fill positions within our law firm, so don't take it personally. Okay.
I get to talk to folks in all kinds of industries because of this show and my work. And it's a pretty universal thing still today. So
I think it's a recovery. It's a COVID recovery process. And I also think that, it's a generational component too of a different in pivoting and in my expectations of who's coming through, but never deviating from making sure that the people that we choose to come aboard are going to be able to share our passion and our vision and our mission.
Sharon, what's maybe a particular challenge, personally or professionally, that you've gone through, lessons learned, how you got through that, coming out the other side?
Again, at age 61, I am having been in the field for 40 years now. I really did not, this is where, it's just kind of probably my personality at this point. I didn't believe that I would still be having to fight every day for kids and for families and for funding and for organizations to do right by children and families. And I think that's just naive. I am very passionate about what I do. And I take things very intensely, making sure that we're doing the best we can for kids. But I would have loved for it to not be such a challenge, but I think that that's just the reality. I am somebody who will go to the mat for kids and families, and it's just my personality and the way I was created. But I don't always enjoy that part of things. I would really love for things to be smooth sailing. I just don't think that's life. And the lessons learned is if I had known that at 61 I would still be battling and fighting, I may not have done it. So I'm really thankful that I didn't know that.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Absolutely. I still would choose it, I'm sure of it, because there's nothing better. I had a call a couple months ago from a grandma who had a grandchild that she was needing, who was showing some signs of developmental delay. And she said to me, my son was in your program, and I just want you to know that he just graduated from USC Business School. This is, and I was like, and that was a beautiful moment. And I thought, okay,
the fight is worth it.
The fight is worth it. And when we get graduation cards and pictures of college acceptance from kids that were in the program years and years ago, it's all worth it. It's all worth it. To see the progress that kids made. I have another quick story. I had two girls over the summer who both, they had both been in the program since they were 2. I think one started when she was 3. So still in diaper stages. And I saw the two girls chatting, and they're both 12 years old. And I said, "Oh, girls, what's going on?" One said, "Oh, she just started her cycle." And I said, "Right now?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, do you have anything in your backpack? Did mommy send you with any kind of some supplies for that?" And she said, "No." And her friend said, now mind you, these are both girls who came to us very significantly on the autism spectrum, who have emerged to really be at grade level and doing really fabulously well. And so her friend said to her, "Oh, I have a pad in my cubby. Let me go get it for you." So she went and got her pad. And so I took the other gal in the bathroom and showed her what to do. And I said, "You doing okay?" "Oh, yeah, I'm fine." "Okay." So, and I checked on her the rest of the day, and her friend checked on her because her friend had started her cycle a few months before. And so I called the little gal's mom and I said, "Okay, so your daughter has started her period." And mama freaked out. "Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Does she need to get picked up? Is she okay?" I said, "No, she's great." And her friend helped her. And it was truly such a beautiful moment. Not only had these girls come from diapers to getting their first period, but also to watch the camaraderie and the friendship and how they stayed calm and regulated. And it was just like, oh, it's no big deal. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment.
And I have to imagine that it really helped that it was her friend that was helping her with part of this, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So it's,
and her friend was like, "Oh, it's no big deal."
It's like, yeah,
it's no big
this
deal.
Happens.
Yeah, let me go get the pad out of my cubby.
Yeah.
It was truly a beautiful, beautiful moment. So those things all make it worth it. And all the battling and, yeah. So yeah. I'm grateful. I'm super grateful to be where I'm at this point.
Sharon, I've just got one more question for you, but before I ask it, I want to let people know the best way to get in touch with you. What would that be?
My email is always the best way to reach me. You can also access the website, and there's contact forms all over it. So and those all come directly to my email. So my email is going to be, I'm sure, in your show notes. But do you want me to share that?
Yes, please.
Now?
Yep.
Okay. So it's Sharon, Sharon, at smartstartschool.com. And I am a very reliable returner of email. And I also, if somebody wants to call me, they can send an email, and I'm always happy to talk to people, whether or not they ever have any interest in the school or send their kids to the school. I'm always happy to chat with people.
Oh, that's tremendous. That's very generous of you. So last question for you, Sharon. What do you see are the big changes that are kind of coming in your field in the next couple of years?
Oh, boy.
That's a big one, huh?
That's a big one, because that means I have to get my head up out of my current challenges.
Maybe just one thing. What's something that you think is coming that outsiders like myself wouldn't know about?
Oh my goodness. I don't know how to answer that question.
Right.
I would say I have my hopes and dreams. My hopes and dreams are that children who have identified needs have opportunities for different ways of being worked with and really seen as unique, and have opportunities to learn and grow, and not be seen as a problem, but be seen as an opportunity for them to grow. And this is a story that I think I would love to be able to have people kind of ponder. Many years ago, I was at a very large conference, and there were about 1,000 people in the audience, maybe more, maybe 2,000. And there was this gentleman along the side who was probably in his early 20s, and he clearly was, by my estimation, on the autism spectrum. And he's running up and down on the side aisle, and he's hopping along, and he's clapping, and he's bobbing, and he's making a lot of vocalizations. And I had a lot of thoughts. Oh, he has autism. He's very significantly impacted with autism. And I made all sorts of assumptions about him. And they introduced who the next speaker was going to be at the conference. And guess who the speaker was at the conference? It was that man. He went up on the stage, and he proceeded to type out his he had a device where he was able to type in, and then it was a voice projection. And that man was not a verbal communicator, but he was an incredible, accomplished, deep thinking man who did not have the ability to speak using his voice. And he shared his story, and it was a testimony of being underestimated and people making assumptions about who he was based on the output of the sensory system in his body. It was a transformational moment for me, because I really, truly want to be able to say, never underestimate who kids are based on what you see. And to really dig deep to discover who they are, because, oh my goodness, you're going to be surprised, and you are also going to be humbled in that process. And so I just want to encourage people out there to really spend the time to get to know kids, and to keep a really high level of expectation, and never underestimate them.
Sharon, that's a beautiful and perfect way to end today's interview. Thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
It's always my pleasure.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.